Hello, everyone. Here's Everton de Oliveira from the Groundwater Project. Our mission is to offer high-quality groundwater learning tools to all people in all language all over the world. You're watching this video is an honor and a great sense of accomplishment to all of us who are donating time and talent to make it a reality. Please tell your friends and foes about us. Come to our website, share our links, follow us on social media. Together, we make groundwater visible. So please consider making a donation. We depend on people like you. And today, we have the pleasure to release another important book, a conceptual introduction to the origin and development of surface and near surface brines and evaporites. Our guest here today is Warren Wood. He has worked for the U.S. Geological Survey for over 40 years. And during the last years of that time, he was also a Christensen Fellow at St. Catherine's College, Oxford University, UK. And then after that, John Hanna Chair of Integrative Studies at the Michigan State University in the United States, 20 years ago. Wow, when you see a CV like that, we feel so lazy. Welcome, please join us, Warren. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is your second contribution as an author to the Groundwater Project. The first one as a co-author, the first one was a co-author on the groundwater in our water cycle. Please introduce yourself for those who don't know you. They don't know what they're missing. How you started your career and how groundwater became part of it, please.
Well, it's interesting. I started out I had a classic education in geology, not in groundwater. Remember, this was at the university in the 1950s. This was before groundwater was discovered by these societies. And so my background, as I say, was a classical geology training. I had no courses in groundwater hydrology. There weren't such a thing in the 1950s. But I worked for a couple of years as a geophysicist, and that didn't seem to be going anywhere. So after my master's, I decided to do a PhD, and I needed some money to support it, because back in those days, graduate students were not supported. You had to support yourself. And so I got a job with the U.S. Geological Survey, measuring groundwater levels and gauging streams, just as what was called a hydrologic tech at that time. And I realized that there was really something very interesting about groundwater, and that was really the start of my career. I had originally planned to do a PhD in igneous petrology, and that clearly is a big step away from geochemistry, but low temperature geochemistry. Anyway, I did a PhD, and in the topic was kind of interesting. It was ultrafiltration or reverse osmosis. And in that, that was largely involved with brines. I was trying to apply it to freshwater systems. But it was, so I got kind of interested in brines. And the state of Michigan has several companies, number of companies that are utilizing brines. Dow Chemical Company is a big user of brines. And then there's salt mines all over the Detroit area. So I became kind of interested in brines, and as a sort of a subspecialty or a subtopic of interest. So when I've been assigned or worked in different areas of the world, I kind of look at brines in addition as part of the water resources. It's, waste disposal, brines, in addition to the water supplied, are all part of the water resources. So it was kind of a broad view, and my interest in brines is just part of it. So that's Bill, I was very
so you mentioned ultrafiltration. That is a natural yes.
Yes, this was it was largely due to thick shale zones and shale zones that act as membranes to filter out the ions. Chris Nuzell of the U.S. Geological Survey has done a lot of work and really done some really excellent work in there. And as I mentioned, I didn't have any formal training with in groundwater hydrology. Although it's interesting, I've worked with some of the best and the brightest in the U.S. Geological Survey. I was fortunate in my first research position to work with C.V. Tice, who is one of the giants of hydrogeology. And then I worked with John Bredehoft and Lenny Conoco and Cliff Voss and Alan Shapiro and just and most with Ward Sanford. He and I co-authored probably 10 or 15 papers together. So I've been really fortunate in learning from these really giants. Paul Shea was just the most incredible guy that I've worked with. And so it's just been a huge positive experience working with these individuals. And I learned from them, hopefully.
How many great names you just mentioned there. It's just impressive.
I was in a golden age of hydrogeology when the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm not sure it's the same now, but when I was there 20 years ago, it was a fantastic place to do the research.
Yeah, well, we can only say that, you know, at least 30 years after, right? So we have to wait to see what people will say right about the guys today, right? Hopefully there will be just giants as well. Let's hope for that.
Yes.
Okay, so your book presents a fascinating feature of the groundwater studies that most hydrogeologists don't know. Could you tell us what are the surface brines and evaporites, their importance, and why should we care?
Well, it's interesting. These shallow brines are ubiquitous. First of all, it's about 18% of the continents are closed basins. Now, not all of them have brines as an output, but it's surprising that that's a large number of non-integrated drainage in the continents. Much of it is in the glaciated areas where so it's not in an area that's likely to get brine development. But there's 20 to 30% of the continents have a semi-arid to arid environment, and it's in these environments that you get in a closed basin or a restricted basin, you get development of brines. And they provide some paleo climate information, they provide a paleo hydrologic information, and in addition to being commercially valuable, a lot of these things are mined for bromide and borax and sodium sulfate and sodium carbonate. These are large, so they have economic significance. And some of them are, some of the brines in Abu Dhabi, for example, are very high in magnesium, and it has a potential for some development along those lines. So there's as I say, economic interest in them.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, in Bolivia, I was reading your book, and I took a motorcycle trip from Brazil to Bolivia.
Oh wow! I envy you that. I would have loved to have gone along on that one.
Oh yes, if you come, I can go again, and you love, because we go through many. You know, in your book, you mentioned because there are several names for those evaporites, like salar. In South America, most of them are called salar.
Yes.
Right. And then I think in Middle East they called sabkas. Yeah.
And in the English it's salt flats or salt lakes or something like pans. Something like that. Yeah.
Well, in Bolivia, they say it's the largest salar in the world. It's very big.
Yeah.
Very big. It's like 100 kilometers wide. It's so big. You can see on Google. It's very nice. So we drove on that salar. It's amazing. Amazing. Yeah. It's so nice. It's big.
Yeah, well, you know, on the Great Salt Lake, it used to be, I don't know whether it still is, but it was always a racing venue for high speed.
Oh, yes,
because it's so flat and so hard that these race cars could.
Exactly. And you're sure you're not going to get, nothing.
You're not going to hit anything.
Yes.
Pretty boring.
But the problem with these things, it's easy when it's too wide like that in Bolivia. It's too easy to get lost. You have no
reference. Yeah.
No reference. Exactly. It's all white. and have no reference. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, the glare off that is really something. I've worked in the area in Abu Dhabi where the temperatures be getting 51, 52, 53, and that really is hot because you're getting the reflection off the surface, and it really is
Yes, like
uncomfortable.
Death Valley, right? Like the Death Valley in US. It's amazing. So
Yeah,
hot.
yeah,
Jesus Christ. Good, good.
yeah.
So your text begins with a sort of blow in our nose. You mentioned that the topography of the coastal Sabica being controlled by the thermodynamic activity of water. What the hell is that? Was Jesus. The
Well,
topography is controlled by the water. What? Okay.
okay, well, let's start out. First of all, let me give the kind of the concept of what I was trying to do with the book. I didn't want to get into the weeds and a lot of calculations. I just wanted to give a conceptual idea of how things work. So if a normal, real hydrogeologist went into an area, he'd have some, or she would have some interest in saying, oh, I kind of know how that works, not be able to detail calculations. So there are no calculations. I don't even think there's an equation in that particular thing.
No.
But anyway, the idea is that there's in many areas on the coastal Sabkha, there's a dynamic equilibrium between the aeolian processes and the water table. In other words, the water table controls. You cannot erode below the water table. You can't, in fact, you can't erode below the capillary fringe, which in that area is about 1 meter thick. And so as a consequence, you have a big sand supply in the Ruba Khali, which is the desert in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And so you have a strong wind. And so what happens is that along the coastal areas, the surface is controlled by the water table. Now, that's okay, that's number one. The second part is that you can only have evaporation if the thermodynamic activity of the brine is greater than the water. So if, for example, if you have humidity of 95%, you're not going to get evaporation if the activity of your brine is 0.5, 0.5 is the thermodynamic activity of many brine.
Just give the example that you gave on the book. What is the thermodynamic activity for those who don't know? Because you have a very clear explanation there.
Well, it's just the ability of pure water has a thermodynamic activity of 1, and as molecules interfere with the water, as you add more and more solids, the molecules interfere with the evaporation of the water. They literally interfere, won't let water molecules reach the surface. So as a consequence, there's less activity. The water doesn't act as a pure substance. And this has to be addressed in thermodynamic calculations of equilibrium and whatever. And so it's kind of important to understand that you can only get evaporation. Now, for example, if a brine is reached, say 0.5 thermodynamic activity, you cannot evaporate unless the humidity is less than 0.5. So in many areas of the world, coastal areas, the humidity is always pretty high. And so you reach an equilibrium where you cannot evaporate. Water will lay on the surface for months after a rainfall. And because it dissolves
in the desert, that in the desert, you have water.
Yeah, what happens is the water falls and it dissolves the solids and becomes very dense and are high in dissolved solids, and it just can't evaporate. So you'll stay in Abu Dhabi, we would say you get the rain season as January and February, or December and January, and water would still be lying around in February or March. It just can't evaporate because the humidity is high. So anyway, it's a kind of an interesting complex from a topography standpoint, how how all of the brines and the interacting with the groundwater. It's a very interesting story, I
It
find.
is. It is very interesting. Yes,
I'm
I see that because and this evaporation and this change in the topography can be geologically speaking, they can be very fast, right?
in what way do you mean?
Well, I
The
mean,
brine?
for example, in you go in. I mentioned the salar in Bolivia.
Yeah.
People still call, they have one place there. The city or the village there is called a port because that used to be a lake in the past. So and in the past that people still have the memories because of the village has the name of the port. So it's in geological time. This is
Yeah.
nothing. Right?
No, it's actually, we see this happening rapidly in salinization in agriculture, where
Yeah.
groundwater tables rise, and it's a matter of just a few years, 10
Yeah.
years, and you can go from, I call it a white cancer, because you go from really a very slow appearing thing, but in geologic time, it's really quite rapid. It's a matter
Exactly.
of a few years.
Exactly. It's amazing.
So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, but for but this book is very good. You had a huge success in explaining that so clearly in such a short book. That's very good.
Well, I'm afraid I haven't articulated it very well here. I'm struggling for words this morning, I guess. Anyway, I think the book is a little clearer than my ability to articulate it.
No, you're doing great. So another question: how are closed and open systems related to the natural environment?
Well, this was a kind of an interesting thing that Ward Sanford and I worked on. Ward was a major contributor to this, and we looked at a series of lakes, saline lakes in the high plains of Texas and New Mexico. And in there were probably 50 saline lakes. Well, many of them had wildly different chemistries, and yet they were all originated from the same source. The source was the Ogallala evaporation of the Ogallala aquifer. Groundwater would come into these. Basins were formed under Aeolian conditions 200,000 years ago, and they were below the groundwater table at that time. The groundwater table had risen now, so it's a discharge area. And we looked at these things and we said, my gosh, why are all of these so different? We have sodium sulfates, we have sodium carbonates, we have all kinds of sodium chlorides. What in the world is happening? And we recognize that the difference occurs because of open and closed system. Most analyses assume that these basins are topographically and hydrologically closed. And if that's the case, you can easily calculate the mineral assemblage. It's been done for 100 years or more. But what happens if it's leaky? It's slightly open. It looks closed, but there's a slight leakage. Changes the whole picture completely. You get an entirely different assemblage depending upon the amount of leakage. If there's very little leakage, it looks like a closed basin. If it's a lot of leakage, maybe only thing you'll get is deposit of gypsum or calcite. And what you get is the difference between these things makes it all the difference in the evolution of the solutes, because some of them can escape, and you've developed a situation where you can get large thicknesses of only one or two minerals. And that's where economically, that's very interesting, because that's what you're really looking for, rather than 500 different minerals of a millimeter each. That's typically what you get out of a closed system. You get sodium chloride if you generally, and then a lot of different other minerals, 15 or 20 different other minerals. But so it's the groundwater component of here is what we want to emphasize, because it's this leakage out of the system that controls it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's something about that on a Freeze and Cherry book as well, right?
They looked at open and closed systems, but not in how it evolved
That, yeah.
the solutes. I think our contribution was fairly innovative, and it was published in 1990. In one article I had in Economic Geology, and an award had an article in American Scientist, I believe it was.
Okay.
And this was 1990 or 91, a few years ago, 30 years ago. I think that really, in my view, kind of explained why we see all of these different varieties of solutes in these different lakes, even though the source may be very similar.
Yeah, that's very nice. It is well done in your book. Congrats. That's very good. Wow. So another thing is that people don't really see very clearly. How is there a flow of solutes due to evaporation, and how does it occur? Because not many people can actually visualize the effect.
Yeah, well, of course, evaporation brings to the surface, if you have water, let's say you have water near the surface, groundwater near the surface. If you evaporate it, it has to be, the capillary surface has to be in contact with the surface. And the capillary zone in typically fine sands is about 1 meter, and sometimes it can be, if it's in gravel, sandy gravel, it might be 0.5 meter, but essentially that has to contact the atmosphere. And if it does, then both you remove the water, but you literally pump. Consider the evaporation as a large pump, and you're pumping water and solutes. And what you do is get rid of the water, and the solutes remain. Can't evaporate those. In most cases, there are some elements that go to a vapor, but generally they just accumulate to the like calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, things of that nature accumulate. So this is why you build up the concentration. Essentially, the removal of water. You're pumping both water and solutes, but you're removing just the water.
Yes, interesting. Well, we can write to the salar there. We can get very nice crystals of halite.
Oh, yes. Is that a sodium chloride, that particular one? Okay, because...
Yeah, sodium chloride. So you have very nice crystals.
Yeah, I believe there was a study on bromide. I was quite interested in bromide because it's typically used as a chloride bromide ratio for evaluating. It essentially comes from the ocean. The precipitation is constant, and it's a way of looking at whether you're dealing with salt dissolution or not by looking at the chloride bromide ratio. So that's one thing that a geochemist kind of looks at. Well, it turns out in many cases, you can actually lose bromide. It goes off as a vapor, and so it changes the ratio. So and I believe that area in Bolivia was sampled for that and identified a pretty significant amount of bromide vapor.
Bromide as well, yes.
Yeah.
Interesting
site.
Finally, since you have some nice pictures there, you've seen a lot of these features because you've been studying that for so long. Would you recommend visiting those places as a tourist?
Yes, most of the places, you go to a typical geologic seminar and they always show a beautiful mountain range and trees. And when I present a seminar, a flat piece of white. So it's not very spectacular in terms of being entertaining, but it's interesting to see it for a few minutes, like your trip to Bolivia. It was interesting for you to see that environment, and look at it. It's part of it's sort of an end member of an environment, and it is what it is. I can't say that it is appealing as a nice mountain stream and forests and wild animals running around. There's no vegetation on these things. There's just white salt of one form or another.
Well, I asked that because I've seen the pictures, and for us geologists, those things are appealing, right? Yes. Not sure to everybody, but it is. And I thought it was quite appealing, and it is a tourist place there.
It's interesting. It's different. It's like Death Valley. People in the United States visit Death Valley. Well, it's not exactly spectacular, and it's a vista, but it's interesting.
Yes,
I would classify these.
It's different.
if you're ever in Abu Dhabi, you should take rent a car and drive along the coast. You'd find very interesting topography there.
Exactly, yeah. And what is quite interesting that I see, and in your book explains very, very well, is that when you go to places like that, people can hardly realize how they are formed.
Yeah,
They can hardly.
it's interesting.
It
You
is.
run into different conceptual models, most of which are not based on science. They're based on a miracle occurs or something. And it's always a bit of a struggle to try to educate people and try to put it in a scientific context. And we had a bit of a problem in the United Arab Emirates looking at the source of the solutes. The early work had said it was the seawater, and there's a sea right, a meter away. Obviously, it must be seawater. Well, it turns out that it was groundwater discharge, not seawater. And it took a while for people to understand, okay, maybe that's the way it's happening. But it was a bit of a struggle in the literature. It got turned down at a lot of journals because, no, that can't be. And so the reviewers weren't always as open as you'd like. That's the problem.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Science, evidences are not exactly what people would like to hear, right? That's problem.
Right.
Very good, very good. So that was very nice having you here, and I'm pretty sure your book is going to open the minds of lots of people who don't know how evaporites work, because it's so well explained, and it's a agreeable reading. Congratulations. Please make your final remarks.
Well, I want to thank you, and you stay safe from your COVID in Brazil. You guys have had an awful run of it there.
Tell me.
We read about your terrible death penalty, so I hope you're safe and well, and give my best to your friend Roberto that you introduced me to. He was a big help in our publication that we're working on. Anyway, in summary, I just say that it's just part of the hydrologic cycle. Everybody kind of needs to consider the full spectrum when you go into an area and look, is there opportunities for development of the commercially, or how does it impact the water resources, the water supply? So it has some ramifications other than being just sort of an oddity. I think it fits into the whole hydrologic picture.
I do too, and we can bike into these places
as well. I'd love to do it. Thank you so much for the interview. It's been my pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye, Warren.
Okay. Goodbye.